Interesting discussion. I look forward to this one all year because the COP process is really largely misunderstood, but it's an important part of the policy development. And so I love having the discussion and sharing feedback as I labor through meeting after meeting throughout the week. So it's anyone, by the way, there's only a few rules. So mute yourself, you're in control. Ask your questions in the chat box. We will share documents. Actually, we have all the documents so far. Nothing's been updated since 2 in the morning. I got the latest updates last night. And, you know, don't hesitate to challenge me or challenge the thinking process. It's all about learning and improving. So, all right, let's get started. Not a lot about me. Anybody who's joined before knows who I am. I actually predate the entire COP process. Scary. Makes me feel very young. I'm kidding. But 25 years ago, this is a quote from Desmond Tutu. I really like this one. You know, it was okay to not know. You know, when I would work and maneuver through the industry at various levels, not a lot of people understood climate change or understood refrigerants' impact on climate change. We're going to talk about some of the COP processes that come to mind and help expose or present the topic in a different way. But technically, this all falls under the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was started in roughly 1993. However, 1972 was the first UN Environmental Program meeting. So that was the year the UNEP began. And the UNFCCC then became the framework on that. COP stands for Conference of the Parties. It is this is a quote directly from the UN. So they really love two things. They love to talk about their governance and they love their acronyms. Boy, everything's got an acronym. So don't be surprised if I don't remember all the acronyms, but I'll share what I've got. It's comprised of all the members that have voluntarily participated in the UNFCCC, which I believe today is 197. And the purpose of COP is to review the implementation of the convention and any legal instruments. So this is sort of the rule-making process, and then that rule has to be converted into a regulation. We'll talk a little bit about that. So this year it's being held in Glasgow. There are two zones. One is the blue zone, the other is the green zone. If you're a normal person like you and I, we cannot get tickets to the blue zone. They're very hard to come by. I participate on 2 environmental committees. We were able to send 5 people from each group. Those 5 people, there are no men. I don't know how to put that any less sensitively, but it's all women primarily that went. And so the program has a very select, narrow group of people that can go into the blue zone. Unless you're a policy person at a government agency like EPA or one of the other environmental agencies, then you can go into the blue zone. Blue zone is open what seems like 24 hours a day right now. And the green zone is open about 14 hours a day. The green zone is the commercial side of the venue. We can go. The problem is there are a lot of restrictions around the green zone. I would have loved to have been there this year. There's not much in here for refrigerants, but we're going to talk about the few things that are happening around refrigerants. This COP initiative or this COP event is really heavily focused on forestry, finance, coal, and this concept around net zero. Any questions so far? All right, Roy, I'm glad you're muted. You probably gulped twice when I mentioned the fact that men aren't allowed to go, or it's not that we're not allowed, we're not invited.
Yeah, it's probably best that way.
I heard a great quote the other day, but I won't share it. I shouldn't say I'm going to share something, but it was basically no males, they're too stale. So
Okay.
yeah, it made me laugh. All right, so why are refrigerants special? Well, these man-made gases have incredible impact on carbon, or incredible carbon equivalency. These are not your run-of-the-mill things like methane. Although methane is a SLCP, which we'll talk about in a second, refrigerants have a special place because they have so much impact. So it's important to note that they are not treated, and they shouldn't be treated the same as other carbon items. Refrigerants, we have heard them called HFCs, CFCs, HCFCs, F gases, refrigerants. But for the purpose of talking about the UN, I told you they love their acronyms. These are referred to as SLCPs, short-lived climate pollutants. And this basket does include things like anthropogenic black carbon, hydrofluorocarbons, which are HFCs, and methane. But HFCs are the granddaddy of them all in this pile of items. They have the most impact. So let's say methane, for instance, might have an impact of, I think it's 70 or 80, I don't remember specifically. The lowest refrigerant is, and that's a fluorinated compound, I should mention. The lowest fluorinated compound that's part of this is somewhere around 750. Although R123 is a refrigerant that has a much lower a GWP, it is also an ozone depleting material. So the convention that manages that was actually the Montreal Protocol. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that, but we're not here to talk about the Montreal Protocol today because that was not part of the COP process. That predated COP by about 10 years. All right, key COP events, very important. Kyoto, which was harshly shot down by the US government back in the late 90s. Although it was accepted by the party that went, the follow-up government or the follow-up elected group of officials chose not to participate. Two key things about Kyoto, why Kyoto is so important. Kyoto identified SLCPs as a special section, and they gave clarity to this class of gases. And the US chose not to join. Those are the two big things. We're also going to talk about something else that happened at Kyoto. There were mechanisms for trading what's referred to as CDMs, Clean Development Mechanism credits. I'm not sure this is the greatest legacy for Kyoto, but it's what happened there. Shortly after Kyoto, there was a group that was formed as a result of the US government, well, not shortly after, a bunch of years later, which is called the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. And this group, I think it started off as just roughly 8 or 10 countries formed largely by the United States. And I don't think it was any heavy hitters beside the US at first, not to diminish the significance of Ghana or Bangladesh, they're important, but there were no other large countries with big populations that had heavy impact on SLCPs. SLCPs are the primary target, or one of the primary targets of the Clean Air, Climate and Clean Air Coalition. So let's say that was an interim step. It was not part of COP. However, SLCPs and the attention paid to them by the CCAC did make their way into COP in Paris. We've all heard, or many of you should have heard of the Paris Agreement. I don't know if that's one of the survey questions, but it would be great to know who knew about the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement, but it set out the framework that focused on the 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. goals. And it also aimed to strengthen the transparency between countries. And that's a really big deal. And it also talked about NDCs, which are the national contribution to carbon that each country has, it's basically your bottom line accounting. And I think there's been a lot of problems around these NDCs. As a matter of fact, both Kyoto and Paris failed to adequately address fugitive emissions. It's really interesting. Fugitive emissions are the core topic in Scope 1 emissions, other than carbon related to keeping a facility or an organization operational. It is fugitive emissions. However, there is no place, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, where we report fugitive emissions when reporting emissions between countries. Anyone have any questions on that? It's very technical, but I'm happy to dive in, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. All right, October 2016. This is the Kigali Amendment. Again, not a COP program, but this was important because this brought SLCPs some structure globally, and it put HFCs under the Montreal Protocol. This is a highly controversial move here in the United States. It was very political. It did receive endorsement from enough countries to go into effect in 2017, 2017 or 2018. So it is in effect, and it was very focused on cutting production and consumption of HFCs. One of the things I'm happy to talk about is the messy gray line between consumption and production. Some countries, like the United States, use supply controls to do most of the dirty work for managing refrigerant reductions. What we do is we transition from an older generation to a newer generation with reductions in availability, and then we hope that that will move enough of the marketplace into the next generation. That's how we've grown from 125 million pounds of emissions in the US to 600 million pounds, is because these mechanisms are not perfect. But a lot of this work was done under the Kigali Amendment. So the Kigali Amendment did supplement the Paris Accord or Paris Agreement. Any questions there? All right, good. So how many organizations are involved in COP26? Well, there are a handful, and these are the three. The top two, these are the three most important. The top two are familiar organizations at UN. The bottom one, I'm going to introduce to you because it's having a bigger influence on the markets. The top two, the UN FCC and the UN EP. So the UN FCC is exactly what it says there. It's the Framework Convention for discussing and managing and creating regulations around international treaties related to greenhouse gases. And the UNEP, which is sort of the grandfather of this entire process, and it was established back in 1972, is the structure where most of the funding comes through. And the last group is the UNPRI, and it may not be well known, but it's a very important group. And this is the Principles for Responsible Investment. And this is made up of private sector commitments. So this is where the UN engages the private sector in these 6 aspirational principles, which I'm happy to share with you afterwards. I don't have them all memorized, but these are basically principles around clear disclosure between companies, shareholders or investors, and what's happening inside the company. Technically, the UNPRI does a better job at creating transparency than either the UNEP or the UNFCC. The UNPRI is also a lot more engaged in successful policy development. Well, of course, that's judgmental, but it is very successful in getting these 6 aspirational principles into the hands of the private sector. Any questions there? Ray, nothing? All right. And Ray, I see some questions in the chat box, so if you want to stop me, stop me.
Nope, sorry, I had to unmute. It almost seems like a bowl of spaghetti of organizations that are looking at this, but where is the accountability in any of them?
Well, it comes down to voluntary commitments by the countries. The UN has no enforcement action. Now, there are some enforcement mechanisms, and I'm going to trip over those later on. I say trip because I didn't plan to drill in too deep, but there are some things that do happen if countries go outside the boundary lines, but they have to be enforced by other countries instead of the UN. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but yeah, there's no.
So basically nothing. Well, if the other countries do something, is it pretty much economic sanctions? And has that ever happened?
Yeah, it has happened. We're going to talk about that in a minute,
Okay.
Or a few minutes, but we're almost there. So what is COP26 done for refrigerants lately? Basically, the focus is on destruction over recycling and energy efficiency in equipment. This is a big topic. So it's been determined that refrigerant recycling may not be very effective in the marketplace. And it's actually caused a lot of misunderstandings over the last 27, 28 years as these market programs have gone into place. So Japan and France participated in a Pan-Asian, like Vietnam, Thailand, maybe even Laos, and maybe even Indonesia a little bit, but a pilot program to determine if destruction was a better path than recycling. And I'm happy to talk about that. This was about a 1-hour discussion, and it was hosted by, I don't remember who was hosted by now. It was just yesterday. But the net effect of this discussion was that refrigerant destruction was efficient and practical and provided clarity on what was going to happen with the material after it left its recovery source. And also, there is so much discussion about the expansion of refrigerants. We're likely going to go from about 1.6, I'm going to get this right, billion pieces of cooling equipment on the planet today. And the expected number by 2050 is 5.6 billion systems. So we're talking just over 300% growth. It's big numbers, very big numbers. Nobody at the UN is talking about stopping cooling or, ending the cooling, development. What they're really talking about is higher or improved energy efficiency and what to do with this material after it's been recovered. All right, how do we account for this? This is the messy part, very messy part. This is where the policymakers, maybe they established an adequately conceived idea, but then the team of people that they left the activity development to got it wrong. HFC emissions, and we'll talk about this even a little bit deeper, are reported under Kyoto. So although the United States did not believe in Kyoto, we use the Kyoto principles to report our HFC emissions. And HFC emissions are only reported as a function primarily of manufacturing. We do not report fugitive emissions from HFC emissions in the United States. ODS emissions are reported under the Montreal Protocol, and they are also only reported as it regards production. There, we do not report fugitive emissions from ODS. And those are the accounting principles that the, I don't know, I guess the best word is the bureaucratic people at the UN selected to make these decisions. And yes, the US government participated in those panels. the people that wrote these really have very little understanding about the marketplace. They only really understand the macro movements of materials, and they do not understand how these things are used. And I've had this conversation numerous times with the US greenhouse gas inventory team. I'm a panelist on the inventory review every year. We didn't even have a panel for 3 of the last 4 years. But these are accounting gaps that lead to misunderstandings about refrigerant emissions. And the UN has also fostered a really perverse set of incentives at times. This is a bizarre one. Those of us who have been doing this for a long time, we saw this clean development mechanism coming into effect in 2006, and we cringed, and we had every right to. When you're producing R22, oftentimes a byproduct is another product called R23. And chemical plants in China and India were at a very unsophisticated phase in their development as they produced R22 because that was a strong market material. And I'm going to give you some bad numbers. They're rough, but they're going to be indicative of what's going on. Let's say for every 10 pounds of R22, you produced 1 pound of R23. The R23 would get vented. So these policy experts decided, well, you know what, let's establish a price of $6 per carbon ton for R23. And let's pay the Chinese and the Indian companies $6.23 per carbon ton to destroy it. Well, R23 is about 4.5 tons of carbon. So the Chinese would get $24 a pound for every pound of R23 they destroy. But R22 is only worth $1 a pound. So for every $10 of R22 you produced, you then produced $24 of R23 that you could destroy and get money for. And the checks cleared the bank every time. So the Chinese were smart, and so were the US companies. And what they decided to do was increase their R22 production because there were no caps on this. And so they increased their R22 production roughly 20-fold, which meant that they also increased their R23 output 20-fold. And so they at one point were making, the Chinese chemical companies were making roughly $1 billion a year in CDM credits that they were able to take to the bank in cash off of this incentive program to make sure that R23 was destroyed. This program stayed in effect from 2006 through the end of 2018. And so you can imagine the US companies stopped producing R22. The Chinese companies were technically able to produce R22 at a loss because they generated most of their profit from R23 destruction. And as a result, the US companies and basically the entire world purchased their R22 for around 35 to 50 cents a pound, heavily subsidized by CDMs, which were funded by primarily the US, Europe, and Russia to some degree. Russia less, but mostly the US and Europe. Anyone have any question about that? Because this was born from those CDM projects that I mentioned earlier.
Ted, you said that the program ended in 2018. What was the impetus for that finally ending?
I think we were ready to go to a world war over this embarrassment. I mean, you can imagine the policy people that wrote this were told over and over again by people like us, by normal people who could see what was going to happen, that this was an absolute failure in the making, and they just did not want to listen. And they treated us as though we knew nothing about policy. And this shifted the world's refrigerant marketplace in such a way that no policy could ever have changed it. This was a game changer for the whole world.
What is, so it's been 3 years since it's been corrected, to say, and has it made any difference?
Yeah, it's made a big difference because that's why China was so supportive of phasing out R22, because they could no longer make subsidies off the R23. So you cut off the R23 subsidies from the CDMs, and amazingly, both China and India were very supportive of a conversion from HCFCs to HFCs.
Yeah, no more market. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's embarrassment, but it's important to share because these COP programs, there's very little expectation that the I call us the green zone people. They're the blue zone. They can go into the private rooms. There's very little expectation that we'll participate or even review or provide feedback. And so it's a demanding process, and it requires some vigilance and engagement.
How do we, sorry, last question, but how do we get adults into those rooms and talk policy that works?
They won't let us in. They just won't let us in. They don't want us there. They're going to take these policies. They're going to come back to Congress. It's Congress's job to review these things and give it thumbs up or thumbs down. But it's very important because the two groups that participate most aggressively in these programs are the U.S. State Department and the EPA. So you have to get engaged with both those groups, and you have to know how to voice your concerns. They don't want to hear about abject rejection. The Alliance for Responsible, or the Atmospheric Responsibility, I don't remember which one, Kevin Fay's group does an okay job of voicing some concern and providing some sobriety into these discussions. But to date, nothing has been able to change the 1997 Kyoto Protocol's accounting process. I've been trying for 24 years. Once that was set in stone, I didn't understand how the process worked. It spent 24 years trying to unravel that process.
Wow.
We participate. I'm a frontline person. I haven't been hiding in some back corner and complaining. I'm very engaged. These comments you see on the screen in front of you are comments that we made to the U.S. greenhouse gas inventory people in 2017. This is not a political issue. This is really an issue around transparency. We report 1% of emissions in the United States. It's embarrassing because we know that we have higher emissions. Our emissions are distorted as a result. Our emissions are at least 5 times higher than those that we report. So, and it's the same for Europe. It's no different. This is not America's a horrible place. This is not Europe is a horrible place. No country reports their fugitive emissions. All right. Look, the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol was focused on how much climate positive impact would come from reducing HFCs. And they established a number of 0.3 to 0.5 degrees. Now, the reason this is important is that 0.3 to 0.5 degrees was largely based on a factor that is 5 times lower than the one that we're actually dealing with. These are big numbers. So if that gives you any indication about what is actually possible in managing refrigerants better, then to put this all in perspective and give it some gravitas, the carbon emissions from refrigerant are roughly 600 million tons. The carbon emissions from passenger air travel are about 200 million tons. That's just in the United States. Europe is roughly the same. So what that means is our carbon emissions in refrigerants are 3 times larger than passenger air travel emissions. So under the Kigali Amendment, there were agreements made about the phase down. Now, the US agreed to these. And what that meant is because we had shifted all of our refrigerant production to India and China, regardless of what we decided to do right here in the United States, starting in 2024, phase down of refrigerants was going to begin. So I want to repeat that because it's very important. Phase down was going to happen as a result of trade restrictions, no matter what we did here in the US. The AIM Act or not, and I love the AIM Act, was going to have, we were going to be impacted because our trading partners who produce most of our refrigerants, China, India, and Mexico, all had signed on to this program. So they were already going to have a freeze. All right. Let's see. So they already were going to have a freeze here in 2024. And we were going to phase down by 65% to baseline after that. Now, why this is important is, as the US has chosen to offshore, send away, let other people produce our chemicals, then we have to live with the consequences of these international trade agreements in a very different way than we would have to if we were able to produce these materials ourselves. Now, we're capable of it, but nobody likes building chemical plants here. So earlier, Ray, you asked the question about what are the downsides? What's the impact? Well, number one, when these countries slow down their production, it slows down our access to material. So indirectly, we would be impacted by this without the AIM Act. That's number one. Number two, any financing that has to go into these countries is impacted by their success rate with some of these programs. So there's trade issues that happen. And basically what goes on is one country will say, well, you shouldn't be importing that. So we're going to raise our tariff on those materials, or we're going to raise our export tariff on those materials because we have to pay a penalty fee for that. And so there are financial implications all over the place. Now, these have to be put in place by other countries, but this is the direction we were headed in without the AIM Act. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
All right.
Hey, Ted, just backing up a little bit, we have a question from Andy Marshall. And I wondered about it too. Can you define fugitive emissions?
Fugitive emissions, and there's a technical term for it, are essentially emissions from systems as a result of a failure or a flaw in the system. So these are uncontrolled emissions.
Would that be leaks? Or
Leaks, yes.
Leak is just one form of fugitive. Okay.
Yep. Sorry. I spent 6 hours on this yesterday, and I've spent about 20 hours on the past week. You get very technical after a while, so slow me down because I don't like the technical stuff either. All right. Why are refrigerants so important? Here are some very common refrigerants. You can see their impact. They're big. They're very big. And the numbers on the right in red are the 20-year life cycle. So for accounting purposes, we use the GWP of 100 years. But in all reality, the actual carbon impact is 7,208. So 1 pound of R404 is 3 tons of carbon. That's big.
Very
Whereas
big.
we report 1 ton of 404 as 3,936. So this just gives you some idea of these accounting gaps in the thinking process. And you see the other numbers. I picked some common ones. R22. And remember I said earlier, R123 was low. It is low. 90, the best one. The next one up is 704. I could have put 1234 YF in there, which I think is around 500. So anyone have any questions on this? We're almost done.
I think we're good.
All right. So at TrackRef, we like to refer to the top line, the GHG impact, as the top line. We respect the fact that the bottom line, when we refer to the bottom line, we're always referring to the finances and the financial value of something. This is the bottom line number. But GHGs, they are the top line. And so we put it at the top. They're on all of our reports. But what's happening is this Unpri group, and you're wondering how are they impacting things today? They're going into this blue zone. They're sitting with the policy people. They're listening. They hear what the policy people are trying to achieve, and they're not satisfied with these numbers. Now, this is not an insignificant group. This is Goldman Sachs, Blackstone, BlackRock, Citibank, Capital One, investment banking firms. This is 42 of the largest investment banking firms managing somewhere over, the number's big. It's trillions and trillions of dollars of value. They're saying, all right, we hear you, we get it. We know what you're trying to achieve on the public sector, the public sector. We're going to go to the private sector and we're going to do it a little differently. So what they do is this Unpri Group, they go and meet with the SEC and they meet with the EU version of the SEC and they say things like, here's what we're going to ask of you. Our shareholders want transparency. So if Amazon wants to tell us their carbon emission numbers, we want in their ES&G reports, all right, we want those numbers to be treated with the same respect that the financial numbers are treated with. So Unpri, group you never heard of, networking through the largest securities and exchange commissions throughout the world, changes the policy engagement by setting the bench for ESG records to have equal parity and value, and as a result, equal scrutiny to financial records. That's happening today. So we've seen that trend emerging now for a couple of years. All right. There are two formulas that anybody wants to be thinking of internally. The first one is you want to track your installed base of material. Okay, SEC and the EU version and SEC, securities exchange commissions around the world are watching those things. They're saying, all right, we want to know, just like your balance sheet, we want to know where your carbon started, where your carbon ended. If you want to report on that. And if your shareholders are asking for that, this is the format that you need to follow. So they want to know installed inventory, right? The second thing they want to know is how many materials came in and went out, right? So what's the balance sheet look like? Your beginning inventory, your ending inventory, your material changes, your consumption. Those are basically your expenses. That's how you need to be thinking, all right? So, and you want to be able to follow some industry standards. At TrackRef, there's very few standards that we could find globally around the world. There's not many for this reporting. So we built our own standard for material transparency on installed inventory. And we adopted the climate action reserves standard for accounting for mass balance cylinders. Any questions there? All right, call to action. All right, why are we involved in COP26 at all? Well, because we don't just sell refrigerant software. We believe that there's a way to solve this problem. And so our call to action today is we're going to be publicly releasing a program that we helped sponsor with Rotary International. So Rotary International is at COP26, got a team of people there, and they are promoting the destruction of refrigerants over recycling. I'm a recycler, so this is somewhat controversial, but we've learned, as many people have learned the hard way, that since all refrigerants are ultimately vented, until they're destroyed, there's no way to certify that these materials will not continue to be vented. So we're excited about the program. We don't benefit financially at all. We're just excited to help Rotary manage this process. I'm a Rotarian. I have been for about 16 years. And so we'll be sharing some information out with everybody. It's a really great program. It doesn't cost anything to participate. These CFCs are likely going to be destroyed anyways, but I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. Ray, any questions on that?
No, I think this is probably the most important part of the whole presentation is just, what we can do. There's a huge disconnect, of course, in all these talking heads in Glasgow at COP26 for 2 weeks. And we just get, like, as you said to me this morning, just look at headlines. It's very difficult to know where we can insert ourselves.
Yeah, you want to get excited but you can't. I mean, it's discouraging. And everybody was excited about Kyoto, and then all of a sudden, the U.S.'s entire chemical manufacturing infrastructure shifts to China to chase the value that got created through the CDMs, right? Who
Yeah.
saw that coming? Well, the market, but not the policymakers. So we try not to get too excited. We try to have a positive influence on things. And this is Boris Johnson's quote right at the beginning. The goal at COP26, and I know he wanted COP26 to be as exciting as COP16, which was Paris. I think it was 15 or 16, but it's not going to be that kind of impactful thing. But again, another talking head. And on the other side of the table, we have a lot of like other programs out there, and a lot of protests, and they sort of get in the way of what we really need to be done. If I had a selfish, request for COP26, it would have been that they standardize the accounting practices and abandon these accounting gaps that they've built into the infrastructure, but no one's calling me. So
Where would you like to, I mean, I guess I'm saying, what would you like to have seen happen? And what do you think it seems like things are improving a little bit, COP26 aside, but
no,
I don't know,
nothing's
you tell me.
happening. The UNPRI is my most exciting, promising way to get things done now.
Yeah.
Because they see things from the market perspective. They get the strategy and the tactics. And so they know how to target in without leaving a lot on the table, meaning messy, unaccounted for issues. So I like them. I like their energy. And I like that most of these people are private sector people that go in to this UNPRI group for a period of time and then leave and go back to the private sector. So I think that's healthy. What I would ask is, if I could have asked for two things, would have been eliminate these accounting gaps. These are a mess, and they're misleading people into underestimating refrigerant emissions. And we can't get to net zero without actually knowing what we have to account for. So it's
Right.
kind of, I'm going to use a technical term, it's kind of bullshit. But if I didn't believe in it, I wouldn't participate. So I do believe in it still, but I'm not happy with it.
Right.
And what
All
I
right,
hope,
thank you.
yeah, no, what I hope comes out of it today is, as we reach out to people and work with them, we could take these refrigerants, these stocks of CFCs, destroy them, end this cycle of constant venting, and help the global community that's being hardest hit by the impact. Rotary's 100% donation organization. It's one of the top 5 rated charities in the world. It's really exciting.
And what are they doing exactly, and what got them into it to this point? Because that is big.
Well, what got them into it is they wanted to do a little program that they could prove relevance in the market. And so they started this project, and I, as a Rotarian, I heard about it. I wasn't involved at the start, but I heard about it and I thought, wow, we could do so much more to get large companies and entities that have these CFC stocks to destroy them, voluntarily. And so we've talked to a number of them, and we have some donations flowing in. I'm excited about that, but we need more. And we need to rewire the way people think about this. I followed the Japan-France pilot project for destruction of refrigerants. I like it. We're closely aligned to it through some grassroots programs that we participate in the Southeast Asia market. Again, it's all charity. We just want to see the right thing happen. I would rather be part of the solution than part of the problem.
Yeah, that's for sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Let me check the chat box. No, nothing there.
Andy, thanks for showing up. Justin, same. Let's see. If you guys have any additional questions, we'll be sharing some information out, but we're an open book. I mean, this is not a chance for us to lecture or preach. It's to share and learn. So everyone's always welcome to contribute.
Thank you.
Yes, the presentation, Ray will share it out. It'll be on the, actually probably share the presentation if you want, Ray,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
as well as the video,
They'll be both edited in. And then Ted, you mentioned some documents that are
Oh,
supportive.
yeah, Ray, I shared those with you last night. They were those Word documents.
Yes, of course.
Guys, we'll share those with you. These are the actual COP26 documents. So these are the ones that the policy people write at COP26. I'm part of a group. So these guys were feeding them to me last night. I don't remember what time, but around 2 o'clock in the morning was the last one I got. And nothing had changed. So you've got them too after Ray shares them with you. So if you hear someone say, oh, I heard this was happening at COP26, look at the sheets. These are the facts. These are the draft agreements that will ultimately turn into the agreements. I think there'll be a little bit more structure to this. Item number 37 is probably the one that stands out in my mind as the most meaningful one. And it talks about coal. It doesn't even talk about refrigerant, but you'll get what I mean when you read these. But look to item number 37. That's the one that stood out.
Perfect. We'll get those out.
And Andy, yeah, I'll make sure we follow up with you. I've tried everything in the reclamation world. I hope I'm not coming off as negative, but everything I've learned is just directed me back to the destruction path over the reclaim path. So, all right, everybody.
That's it.
Yeah. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Ted.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.